The massive crystal chamber deep beneath the surface of Valia Prime hummed with energy. Hundreds of tall gray-skinned beings moved through the space like shadows, their large black eyes reflecting the blue glow of the walls. This was the heart of the Valian Empire, and today they were discussing something that had never happened before. Ambassador Zektar stood at the center of the chamber, his elongated fingers dancing over a holographic display. Images of a small blue planet appeared in the air above him. The planet looked peaceful from space, with white clouds swirling over green and brown continents. But Zektar knew better than to trust appearances. "Council members," Zektar began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "We have discovered something unusual in the Outer Rim territories. A species has achieved faster-than-light communication without our guidance." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was indeed unusual. For over 1,000 years, the Valian Empire had been the galaxy's greatest power. They found primitive species, studied them, and then carefully guided them into the Empire as junior partners. It was a system that had worked perfectly with dozens of worlds. The process was always the same. First, they would monitor a species until it reached the right level of technology. Then they would make contact, offering friendship and knowledge. The primitive species would be amazed by Valian technology and grateful for their help. Within a few generations, they would become completely dependent on the Empire. It was conquest through kindness, and it had never failed. "Show us this species," commanded High Counselor Velthara, the oldest and most respected member of the Council. Zektar touched the display, and the image changed. Now they could see the surface of the planet. Cities filled with light stretched across the continents. Strange metal objects moved through the sky, and even stranger ones floated on the blue areas that covered most of the planet. "They call themselves humans," Zektar explained. "They live on a planet they call Earth. Our monitoring stations have been watching them for 3 of their years now." The images continued to change, showing humans going about their daily lives. They looked fragile compared to most galactic species. They had no natural armor, no claws, no special abilities that the Valians could detect. They seemed to spend most of their time in small groups, building things and talking to each other. "They appear weak," observed Counselor Nexthi. "Smaller than the Zephyrians, less organized than the Hive worlds, no obvious military strength." "This should be simple." Zektar hesitated before responding. "Perhaps, Counselor. But there are some unusual aspects to their development." Meanwhile, millions of miles away, Captain Jake Morrison was having what he thought was the best day of his career. The communication array he and his team had built was finally working perfectly. After years of failed experiments, they had achieved something that most scientists thought was impossible. "Lisa, are you seeing this?" Jake called to his partner, Dr. Lisa Grant, who was monitoring the quantum readings from across the laboratory. Lisa looked up from her screens, her face bright with excitement. "The entanglement is holding steady across 15 light years." "Jake, we did it. We actually did it." Their laboratory was located on a space station orbiting Earth. It was not an impressive place by galactic standards. The walls were metal panels held together with simple bolts. The equipment was a mixture of advanced computers and devices that looked like they had been built by hand. But to Jake and Lisa, it was the most important place in the universe. "We need to contact the ground stations," Lisa said, already reaching for the communication panel. "Everyone needs to know about this." What neither Jake nor Lisa knew was that their breakthrough had been detected across the galaxy. The moment their first quantum message had traveled faster than light, monitoring stations belonging to a dozen different species had registered the event. Most of these species immediately reported the discovery to the Valian Empire, as was required by galactic law. Back on Valia Prime, the Council was reviewing more data about humans. The reports painted a confusing picture. Humans seemed to fight among themselves constantly, yet they also worked together on massive projects. They had hundreds of different governments, yet somehow managed to coordinate global responses to problems. They appeared to have no unified leadership, yet they had managed to develop advanced technology in just a few thousand years. "There is something else," Zektar said, bringing up new images. "They have been sending signals into space for over a century. Not directed communications, but broadcasts of their entertainment and information." The Council watched in puzzlement as they saw examples of human television, radio, and internet content. There were shows about humans fighting alien invasions, stories about traveling to distant stars, and endless discussions about what they might find in the universe. They seem to expect to encounter other species, noted Counselor Velthara. Most primitive civilizations believe they are alone in the universe. Yes, Sektar agreed. And their entertainment shows a disturbing pattern. In most of their stories about meeting aliens, the humans either defeat the aliens or form partnerships with them as equals. Very rarely do they portray themselves as being conquered or guided by superior beings. This was troubling news for the Valian Council. Their conquest method relied on the target species being impressed by their superiority. If humans already expected to meet aliens and saw themselves as equals, the standard approach might not work. Perhaps we should observe them longer, suggested Counselor Nexthi. Learn more about their psychology before making contact. Impossible, Sektar replied. They have achieved faster-than-light communication. Under galactic law, they must be contacted within one standard cycle. Any delay would be noticed by other species. High Counselor Velthara raised one elongated hand for silence. The chamber fell quiet as she considered the situation. For 1,000 years, she had overseen the expansion of the Valian Empire. She had seen dozens of species integrated into their civilization. None had ever presented a significant challenge. Begin standard first contact procedures, she finally decided, but maintain full surveillance. If these humans prove difficult, we will adapt our approach. As the council session ended, none of the Valians realized they had just made the most important decision in galactic history. They saw humans as another primitive species to be conquered. They had no idea that they were about to encounter something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that treated the impossible as merely inconvenient and saw every challenge as an opportunity to grow stronger. The message was sent the next day. It traveled across space at faster-than-light speed, carrying what the Valians thought was a standard greeting to a primitive civilization. They expected the humans to be amazed, grateful, and eager to learn from their superior technology and wisdom. They had no idea that humans had been preparing for this moment for generations. The alien message arrived on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. Jake Morrison was drinking coffee in the station's small cafeteria when the communication alert sounded. He nearly dropped his cup as he ran to the control room, where Lisa was already staring at the incoming transmission display. "It's not from Earth," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The signal is coming from outside the solar system." The message was simple but clear. It was written in perfect English, which surprised both scientists. How could aliens know their language? The text appeared on their screens in friendly, easy-to-read letters. "Greetings to the people of Earth. We are the Valian Empire, representatives of the galactic community. We have observed your recent achievements in faster-than-light communication. We extend an invitation to join the wider universe as junior partners in galactic civilization. We look forward to sharing our knowledge and wisdom with your developing species." Jake and Lisa looked at each other for a long moment. Then Jake started laughing. "Junior partners?" he said between chuckles. "That's a bit condescending, don't you think?" Lisa was already analyzing the signal properties. "Jake, look at this. The transmission method they're using is based on quantum entanglement, but they're doing it all wrong. We could improve their efficiency by at least 30%. This was not the reaction the Valians had expected. Across the galaxy, monitoring stations reported that the humans had received the message and were responding, but instead of awe or fear, the humans seemed to be critiquing their technology. 3 months later, Earth's first diplomatic mission launched toward the coordinates provided by the Valians. Dr. Sam Clark, a xenobiologist who had spent his career studying life in extreme environments, was chosen to represent Earth's scientific community. Commander Beth Rogers, a military strategist known for her unconventional thinking, would handle security and tactical assessment. The human ship was nothing impressive by galactic standards. It was built from modified Earth technology, with systems that looked crude compared to Valian engineering. But Sam and Beth were comfortable with equipment they understood, even if it wasn't as advanced as what they were about to encounter. "Remember," Beth told Sam as they approached the massive Valian mothership, "we're here to learn, not to be impressed. Stay curious, stay alert." Sam nodded, his eyes fixed on the alien vessel through the view screen. The ship was enormous, easily 100 times larger than their small diplomatic craft. Its surface was smooth and crystalline, glowing with internal light. By all rights, it should have been intimidating. "It's beautiful," Sam said. I wonder how they grow the bio-neural networks in zero gravity. The crystalline matrix must require specific mineral compositions. Beth was taking notes on defensive positions and crew movements visible through the transparent sections of the ship. Interesting design choices. They've prioritized aesthetics over tactical efficiency. That tells us something about their psychology. When their ship docked with the Valian vessel, Sam and Beth were greeted by Ambassador Zektar and his staff. The Valians had prepared carefully for this meeting. The docking bay was designed to showcase their technological superiority. Walls of living crystal pulsed with energy, and gravity fields created impossible water sculptures in the air. Most species were stunned into silence by their first glimpse of Valian technology. Sam walked up to the nearest crystal wall and started asking questions. Fascinating. How do you maintain the ionic balance in a living crystal matrix this size? And the power requirements must be enormous. Are you using zero-point energy extraction or something more conventional? Zektar was taken aback. Most species either cowered in fear or stood slack-jawed in amazement when they first saw Valian technology. They didn't immediately start analyzing it and asking about improvements. The crystals are grown using methods developed over thousands of years, Zektar managed to say. Incredible, Sam continued, pulling out a small scanner and taking readings. Do you mind if I take some measurements? I'd love to understand the growth patterns. Meanwhile, Beth was observing the Valian crew members. They moved in precise, predictable patterns through the corridors. Their security arrangements were extensive but followed obvious protocols. She made mental notes about response times and communication methods. This is a very impressive ship, Beth said to one of the Valian guards. How many crew members does it carry? The guard glanced nervously at Zektar before answering. 50,000 beings work aboard this vessel. And you coordinate them all through the central command structure? That must be complex. We humans tend to prefer more distributed command systems. Harder to disrupt that way. The welcome ceremony was held in the ship's main assembly hall. Representatives from a dozen different species were present, all of them now subjects of the Valian Empire. The Zephyrians stood at attention in their military uniforms, their warrior pride broken after centuries of service. The Crystalline Collective, once master engineers, demonstrated their skills by building small devices for Valian entertainment. Sam was delighted to meet so many different species. He immediately began learning their languages, starting with basic greetings and working up to technical discussions. Within hours, he was having simple conversations with beings from across the galaxy. Your ship construction methods are brilliant, he told one of the crystalline engineers. Have you ever tried incorporating organic components into the matrix structure? We're experimenting with that on Earth. The engineer looked around nervously before responding. We build what the Valians require. Innovation is discouraged. Beth was having similar conversations with former Zephyrian warriors. She found their tactics interesting, but limited by rigid doctrine. On Earth, we encourage our soldiers to think creatively, she explained. Every situation is different, so every response should be unique. The Zephyrians exchanged glances. Creative thinking in military matters was something they had been forced to abandon long ago. As the day progressed, Zektar became increasingly troubled by the human behavior. Sam and Beth weren't acting like representatives of a primitive species meeting their superiors. They were acting like colleagues meeting equals. Worse, they were encouraging independent thinking among the subject species. Tell me about your homeworld, Zektar said to Beth during the formal dinner. It must be very different from what you see here. Oh, it's much more chaotic, Beth replied cheerfully. We have over 200 different countries, thousands of languages, and nobody really in charge of everything. Most species find it confusing, but it works for us. Nobody in charge? Zektar repeated, confused. How do you make decisions? How do you maintain order? We argue about it until we figure something out, Sam added. Sometimes it takes a while, but we usually get there eventually. The arguing is half the fun. This was disturbing information for the Valian delegation. Their empire was built on strict hierarchy and central control. The idea of a species that thrived in chaos was almost incomprehensible. After the humans retired for the night, Zektar called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. We have a problem, he announced. These humans are not responding according to any known pattern. They show no signs of being impressed by our superiority. Worse, they're encouraging rebellious thinking among our subjects. Perhaps we need to demonstrate our military power, suggested one of his advisors. Show them what happens to species that don't cooperate. Zektar considered this option. Military intimidation had worked with other species in the past. But something about the humans made him hesitate. They seemed to view every challenge as an interesting puzzle rather than a threat. Prepare a training exercise, he finally decided. We'll test their military capabilities. Once we understand their strengths and weaknesses, we can proceed appropriately. As the Valian staff began planning their demonstration, they had no idea that Beth Rogers was lying awake in her guest quarters, thinking about everything she had observed. The Valians were powerful, but they were also predictable. Their subject species were capable but discouraged from innovation. And somewhere in all of this, there was an opportunity for humanity to make a real difference in the galaxy. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would change everything. The Valians thought they were preparing to test human military strength. The humans thought they were about to get a valuable learning experience. Neither side realized they were about to discover something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The alarm klaxons echoed through Earth's Orbital Defense Command Center as Lieutenant Colonel Tony Martinez rushed to his command station. The massive screen showed dozens of alien ships approaching the outer edge of the solar system. They were moving in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls gleaming in the light of distant stars. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Valian fleet, reported Communications Officer Janet Hayes. They're requesting permission to conduct a joint training exercise with our defense forces. Tony studied the tactical display. The Valian ships were impressive, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their weapon systems showed energy readings that dwarfed Earth's most powerful defenses. By every military doctrine he had ever learned, this was a hopeless situation. Request permission? He muttered, then smiled grimly. Since when do people ask permission to conduct training exercises in someone else's backyard? Dr. Amy Foster was monitoring the situation from the Scientific Analysis Station. As Earth's leading expert on alien technology, she had been studying Valian systems ever since the first contact. What she saw on her screens made her heart race with excitement rather than fear. Tony, look at this, she called out. Their ship formations are based on classical military theory from at least 1,000 years ago. They're using standard battle tactics that any military academy student would recognize. Meaning what exactly? Tony asked, moving to look over her shoulder. Meaning they're fighting the last war, not this one, Amy replied. Their technology is incredible, but their thinking is completely rigid. Look at their approach patterns, their formation spacing, their communication protocols. Everything follows textbook procedures. Tony nodded slowly. He had noticed the same thing. The Valian fleet was powerful but predictable. They moved like a machine, each ship following predetermined patterns. It was impressive, but it was also vulnerable. All right, people, Tony announced to his command staff. We're going to accept their invitation to this training exercise. But remember, this isn't about winning or losing. This is about learning everything we can about how they fight. The human defense fleet that assembled to meet the Valians was a mixture of converted civilian vessels and hastily built military prototypes. Earth's shipbuilding industry was still in its infancy, and most of the human ships looked crude compared to the elegant alien vessels. But Tony had specifically chosen crews that were used to working with imperfect equipment. Remember, he told his ship captains over the communication network, we're not trying to beat them, we're trying to understand them. Watch how they move, how they communicate, how they respond to unexpected situations, and don't be afraid to try things that don't make sense. Captain Lisa Barnes, commanding the converted cargo ship New Horizon, couldn't help but laugh at that last instruction. Don't be afraid to try things that don't make sense. Tony, that's basically the human motto. The training exercise began with what the Valians considered a simple scenario. A small human fleet would attempt to defend a civilian space station from a Valian attack. The outcome was predetermined in the Valian mind. Their superior technology and experience would quickly overwhelm the primitive human defenses. What happened instead confused every alien observer in the system. The human ships immediately broke formation and scattered in what appeared to be random directions. This was not standard military doctrine by any galactic measure. Proper fleet tactics required maintaining formation integrity and following established battle patterns. Sir, reported the Valian tactical officer aboard Zektar's flagship, The human vessels are not following any recognizable combat protocol. They appear to be improvising. Zektar watched the tactical display with growing puzzlement. The human ships were indeed improvising, but they weren't just moving randomly. They were adapting their tactics in real time, based on what they observed about Valian behavior. Captain Barnes had noticed that Valian ships always turned to port when avoiding obstacles. So she approached from the starboard side, forcing the alien vessels into predictable evasion patterns. Commander Rick Thompson discovered that Valian communication arrays had a brief delay when switching between targets, so he used rapid course changes to confuse their targeting systems. "This is impossible," muttered the Valian fleet commander. "They're using tactics that don't exist in any known military database." The problem was that the human tactics didn't exist in any database, because the humans were inventing them on the spot. Every time the Valians adapted to one human strategy, the humans would switch to something completely different. Dr. Amy Foster was recording everything from her position on the command station. What she saw fascinated her. The Valian ships were incredibly powerful, but they were also inflexible. They had been designed to follow specific tactical doctrines that had worked for thousands of years. When faced with opponents who ignored those doctrines entirely, they struggled to adapt. "Tony, are you seeing this?" she called out. "Every time they encounter something unexpected, they fall back to standard responses. They're not learning from what we're doing." Tony was indeed seeing it. The Valian ships won every individual engagement through sheer technological superiority, but they weren't becoming more effective over time. The humans, on the other hand, were learning something new from every encounter. "New Horizon, this is Command," Tony transmitted to Captain Barnes. "Try approaching their flagship from directly above. I want to see how they respond to a vertical assault." "Copy that, Command. Coming in from the top," Barnes replied. Her ship dove toward the massive Valian vessel at an angle that violated every principle of space combat. The aliens knew the Valian flagship's defensive systems had been designed to handle attacks from the standard horizontal plane that most species used. They had trouble adjusting to the vertical approach, and their return fire was less accurate than usual. "Interesting," observed Commander Thompson over the communication network. "They're having trouble with three-dimensional thinking. Most of their tactics assume flat-plane combat." This observation led to a series of human attacks from unusual angles. Below, above, and from directions that the Valian computers hadn't been programmed to expect. The alien ships could still defend themselves, but they had to work much harder to do so. As the exercise continued, something strange began to happen. The human ships started coordinating their movements without any apparent communication. Captain Barnes would begin a maneuver, and Commander Thompson would automatically move to support her even though they hadn't discussed the strategy beforehand. "How are they doing that?" demanded the Valian tactical officer. "Our sensors detect no communication between their vessels, but they're moving as if they share a single mind." Zektar had no answer. The humans seemed to be developing new tactics faster than his computers could analyze them. Worse, they were doing it through some kind of intuitive understanding that his species couldn't comprehend. The training exercise officially ended with a complete Valian victory. Every human ship had been destroyed according to the computer simulations. But as the two fleets separated, Zektar felt anything but victorious. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "analysis of the exercise data shows some disturbing trends. While we won every engagement, our response times decreased steadily throughout the exercise. The humans forced us to expend significantly more energy and resources than anticipated." "And their performance?" Zektar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Their effectiveness increased by 300% during the exercise. By the end, they were forcing us into defensive positions despite our technological superiority." Back on Earth, Tony Martinez was conducting his own analysis of the training exercise. His staff had recorded every moment of the combat, and the data was revealing. "Dr. Foster, look at these numbers," he said, calling Amy over to his display. "We lost every single engagement, but we lasted longer each time. And look at this. Their energy expenditure increased steadily throughout the exercise." Amy studied the data with growing excitement. "Tony, they're not learning. They won the exercise, but they didn't adapt to our tactics at all. They just used more power to overcome our innovations." "Which means what exactly?" "Which means that if we fought them again tomorrow, we'd do even better." And if we fought them next week, we might actually win some engagements. They're powerful, but they're static. We're weak, but we're evolving. As the reports from the training exercise reached the Valian High Command, a deep unease settled over the crystal chambers of their homeworld. The humans had lost completely, yet somehow the victory felt like a defeat. The primitive species had shown capabilities that didn't fit any known pattern. Most disturbing of all was a comment that had been overheard during the battle. When Captain Barnes was asked how she had developed her unconventional tactics, she had replied, "I just thought about what I would do if I were them, then did something different." The ability to think like an enemy while maintaining one's own perspective was something the Valians had never encountered. It suggested a level of mental flexibility that their rigid society couldn't comprehend. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Valian Empire was beginning. Agent Kethrall had been living among humans for 8 months now, and he was beginning to understand why his mission reports kept being questioned by Valian High Command. Every day brought new observations that challenged everything the Empire thought it knew about civilization development. He had established his cover identity as a visiting researcher from a distant Earth colony. The humans had accepted this story without question, which itself was puzzling. Most species would have demanded extensive verification of such claims. But humans seemed to assume that if someone said they were from somewhere far away, they probably were. Kethrall's current assignment was to observe Dr. Kevin Brooks and engineer Maria Santos, 2 humans who were working on reverse engineering Valian technology. According to all known principles of technological development, this should have been impossible. The humans lacked the fundamental understanding of crystalline matrix engineering that had taken the Valians thousands of years to develop. "Kevin, hand me that quantum resonator," Maria called from underneath a partially dismantled Valian communication device. "I think I figured out why their efficiency ratings are so low." Kethrall watched in disbelief as Maria emerged from the device, holding a component that should have been impossible for her to remove without specialized tools. She had apparently improvised a solution using Earth technology that was centuries less advanced than what she was working on. "Look at this," Maria continued, showing Kevin the crystalline component. "They're using a fixed harmonic frequency for their quantum entanglement matrix. But if you introduce variable frequencies like this," she attached a crude human-made device to the crystal, "you can increase the information transfer rate by 40%. Kevin whistled appreciatively. "That's brilliant. But why didn't they think of it themselves?" "I don't think they experiment much," Maria replied. "Their technology is incredibly advanced, but it's also very traditional. Everything follows established patterns." This conversation confirmed Kethrall's worst fears. The humans weren't just copying Valian technology, they were improving it. And they were doing so by questioning basic assumptions that no one in the Valian Empire had challenged for centuries. He sent his daily report to the High Command, but he knew it would be difficult for them to believe. How could he explain that humans treated impossibility as merely an engineering challenge? How could he describe a species that seemed to thrive on chaos and uncertainty? The breaking point came during a diplomatic dinner between human and Valian representatives. Commander Beth Rogers was describing human military history to Ambassador Zektar, who was trying to understand how such a divided species could pose any threat to galactic order. "So you fought wars among yourselves for thousands of years?" Zektar asked, thinking this information would prove human savagery and disunity. "Oh yes," Beth replied cheerfully. "We've been fighting each other for as long as we can remember. But that's actually been helpful for our development." "Helpful?" Zekral was confused. "How can constant warfare be helpful?" "Well, it kept us from becoming stagnant," Beth explained. "Every time one group developed a new weapon or strategy, everyone else had to adapt or be conquered. So we got very good at adapting quickly." She paused to take a sip of her drink, then continued. "Plus, we've been preparing for alien invasion for decades through our entertainment industry. We call it science fiction. We've imagined every possible scenario for first contact, including the one where seemingly friendly aliens turn out to be conquerors." The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Zektar realized that Beth had just casually revealed that humans had been mentally preparing for exactly the situation they were now in. They had spent generations thinking about how to deal with technologically superior alien species. You planned for this?" Zektar managed to ask. Not planned exactly, Beth replied, but we thought about it a lot. We have hundreds of books and movies about alien contact. Most of them end with humans either fighting off the invasion or forming partnerships with friendly aliens. Very few end with humans being conquered. Kethrol, who was monitoring the conversation from across the room, felt his blood run cold. The humans had not only expected to meet aliens, they had expected to survive the encounter. Their entire culture was built around the assumption that they could handle whatever the universe threw at them. The conversation continued with Beth describing various human science fiction scenarios. She mentioned stories where humans defeated alien empires through superior tactics, others where they formed alliances with oppressed alien species, and still others where they simply outlasted their enemies through sheer stubborn determination. The thing is, Beth concluded, we've always assumed that any species smart enough to travel between stars would be basically like us. Curious, adaptable, willing to take risks. We're starting to realize that might not be true for everyone. This innocent comment hit Zektar like a physical blow. The humans thought that their own characteristics, curiosity, adaptability, risk-taking, were normal traits that any intelligent species would possess. They had no idea how unusual they were. After the dinner, Kethrol sent an emergency report to Valian High Command. His message was simple but terrifying. The humans had no idea how dangerous they were. They treated their own extraordinary capabilities as perfectly normal, which meant they had no concept of limitations that other species considered absolute. The response from High Command was swift and alarmed. Kethrol was ordered to gather more information about human psychological development. What they discovered over the following weeks challenged every assumption the Valian Empire had made about intelligent life. Humans, it turned out, had evolved as persistence hunters on their homeworld. They didn't chase down prey through speed or strength, but through relentless endurance. They would follow an animal for days or weeks until it collapsed from exhaustion. This hunting method had shaped their entire psychology. When humans encountered a problem they couldn't solve immediately, they didn't give up. They kept trying different approaches until something worked. When they failed, they analyzed what went wrong and tried again. When they succeeded, they immediately started looking for ways to improve their success. Dr. Susan Miller, a human psychologist whom Kethrol had been observing, explained this mindset during a lecture he attended. Humans have what we call a growth mindset, she said. We believe that abilities can be developed through effort and learning. Most of our mythology involves ordinary people becoming extraordinary through persistence and hard work. Kethrol realized with growing horror that this was exactly the opposite of Valian psychology. His species believed that abilities were fixed and that individuals should accept their limitations. The idea of constantly pushing beyond established boundaries was not just foreign to them. It was terrifying. The final piece of the puzzle came when Kethrol overheard a conversation between two human children. They were playing with toy spaceships, acting out an invasion scenario. Pretend the aliens have super advanced weapons, said the first child. Okay, but then the humans figure out how to make the weapons work better, replied the second child. That's not fair. The aliens are supposed to be more advanced, so that just means the humans have to be more creative. Kethrol stood frozen as he listened to these children casually discuss out-innovating a superior alien civilization. To them, technological disadvantage was just another puzzle to solve. They had no concept that some problems might be unsolvable. His final report to Valian High Command was classified at the highest levels. In it, he described a species that viewed impossibility as temporary, limitation as negotiable, and defeat as educational. He explained that humans had been unconsciously preparing for galactic conflict for generations, not through military buildup but through cultural conditioning that treated any challenge as surmountable. Most importantly, he warned that humans genuinely believed that any intelligent species would share their adaptability and determination. They had no idea that these traits made them unique in the galaxy. They thought they were normal. The implications were staggering. If humans ever realized how unusual they were, they might begin to understand their true potential. And if they understood their potential, they might start using it deliberately instead of instinctively. The Valian Empire had conquered dozens of worlds by exploiting the psychological limitations of other species. But how do you conquer a species that doesn't believe in limitations? How do you intimidate beings who treat intimidation as just another problem to solve? For the first time in its 1,000-year history, The Valian Empire was forced to consider the possibility that they might have encountered something they couldn't control. The humans weren't just another primitive species to be guided and absorbed. They were something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization that had evolved to thrive on challenge and change. And the most terrifying part was that they had no idea how remarkable they were. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of receiving Agent Kethral's final report. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy gathered in the vast assembly chamber on the neutral world of Terminus Station. The air hummed with nervous energy as beings who had never agreed on anything found themselves facing a common concern. High Counselor Velthara of the Valian Empire stood at the center of the chamber, her ancient voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. Around her, the assembled delegates represented thousands of years of galactic civilization, the hive minds with their collective consciousness, the Silicon Lords with their perfect logic, the energy beings who had transcended physical form. All of them were present. Fellow beings, Velthara began, we face an unprecedented situation. The species known as humans has achieved faster-than-light communication, making them eligible for galactic contact. However, our analysis has revealed characteristics that require immediate council attention. The holographic display above the chamber showed images of Earth and its inhabitants. To most observers, humans looked unremarkable. They were small, soft, and appeared to have no special abilities. But the data that accompanied the images told a different story. The humans, Velthara continued, possess evolutionary traits that make them unique among known intelligent species. They have developed what can only be described as an immunity to psychological limitations. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the chamber. Ambassador Thys of the Crystalline Collective raised a crystalline appendage. Clarify the statement. All species have psychological limitations. It is what allows for stable societies. Precisely the problem, Velthara replied. Human societies are not stable in any conventional sense. They exist in a constant state of controlled chaos. Their individuals are encouraged to question authority, challenge established methods, and attempt tasks beyond their apparent capabilities. The display changed to show examples of human behavior that had been collected by Valian observers. Scientists working on impossible problems, athletes pushing beyond physical limits, children building complex devices from simple materials. Each example was innocuous by itself, but taken together they painted a picture that disturbed the gathered delegates. Furthermore, Velthara added, humans appear to possess what they call science fiction, a cultural practice of imagining and preparing for hypothetical scenarios. They have spent generations thinking about contact with alien species, and in most of their imagined scenarios, they either defeat the aliens or achieve equal partnership. This revelation caused an uproar in the chamber. The idea of a species that had spent centuries preparing for galactic contact was unprecedented. Most civilizations were shocked into submission by their first encounter with superior technology. But humans had been mentally rehearsing for this moment since before they achieved spaceflight. Captain Ryan Foster was unaware of the galactic crisis his species had inadvertently created. He was standing on the bridge of Earth's first true interstellar vessel, a ship built using improved versions of Valian technology. The improvements had been suggested by Dr. Claire Watson, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, who had been studying Valian behavioral patterns for months. Captain, reported Navigation Officer Peter Chen, were receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting immediate travel to Terminus Station for an emergency meeting. Ryan frowned. The message was unusual in its urgency. Previous communications from the galactic community had been formal and slow-moving. This felt different. Set course for Terminus Station, Ryan ordered. And contact Dr. Watson. Something tells me we're going to need her expertise. Back at the Galactic Council, the debate had become heated. Representative Zorg of the Silicon Lords was arguing for immediate military action. These humans represent a threat to galactic stability. Their unpredictable nature makes them unsuitable for integration into civilized society. Military action would be inadvisable, countered Speaker One Mind of the Collective Consciousness. Our analysis suggests that conflict would only accelerate human development. They appear to learn most rapidly when challenged. This was the core of the problem that the Council faced. Every traditional method of dealing with problematic species would likely make humans more dangerous, rather than less. Military intimidation would teach them about advanced warfare. Economic pressure would drive them to develop new technologies. Isolation would give them time to grow stronger. There is another consideration, spoke Elder Flux of the energy beings, its voice resonating through multiple dimensions. The humans may unknowingly possess the solution to galactic stagnation. The chamber fell silent. Galactic stagnation was a topic that all advanced species understood but rarely discussed. After achieving a certain level of technological and social development, most civilizations stopped growing. They became stable, predictable, and ultimately static. Explain, demanded Ambassador Thys. Observe the patterns, Elder Flux replied, manipulating the holographic display to show galactic development over the past millennium. Each species reaches a plateau and remains there. Innovation decreases, exploration stops, population growth stabilizes. We have achieved perfect societies that no longer change. The display showed the truth that every delegate knew but avoided confronting. The galaxy had become a collection of perfect, unchanging civilizations. Each species had found their ideal form and stopped evolving. It was peaceful, stable, and ultimately sterile. The humans, Elder Flux continued, show no signs of approaching such a plateau. Their culture actively encourages continuous growth and change. They may represent the key to renewed galactic development. This suggestion was revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. The assembled species had spent thousands of years creating stable, predictable societies. The idea of deliberately introducing chaos and change was almost incomprehensible. When Captain Ryan Foster and Dr. Claire Watson arrived at Terminus Station, they were immediately escorted to the council chamber. As they entered the vast space filled with alien representatives, Claire felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Greetings, representatives of humanity, High Counselor Velthara said formally. We have requested this meeting to discuss your species' integration into galactic civilization. Ryan stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite the alien surroundings. We're honored to be here. Earth looks forward to productive relationships with all galactic species. That is precisely what we wish to discuss, Velthara replied. Your species possesses characteristics that are unprecedented in galactic history. Dr. Watson spoke up, her scientific curiosity overcoming diplomatic protocol. What characteristics specifically? We've been studying galactic civilization since first contact, and we've noticed some interesting patterns. The silence that followed her words was profound. Ambassador Thys finally spoke. You have been studying us? Of course, Claire replied, seeming puzzled by the question. How else would we understand how to interact effectively? We've been analyzing your social structures, technological development patterns, and psychological frameworks. She pulled out a data pad and began showing her research. For instance, most galactic species appear to reach a technological plateau and remain there for millennia. This suggests highly stable but potentially stagnant societies. We've been wondering if this represents an evolutionary limitation or a conscious choice. The council members exchanged alarmed glances. The humans had been studying them as much as they had been studying humans. Worse, the humans had identified galactic stagnation as a problem rather than an achievement. We have discovered, Ryan added, that human development patterns are apparently unusual by galactic standards. We tend to view our current achievements as temporary stepping stones rather than final destinations. Why? Asked Representative Zorg bluntly. Ryan looked surprised by the question. Because there's always more to learn, more to explore, more to improve. Standing still means falling behind. Behind what? Pressed speaker one mind. Behind what we could become, Claire answered. Every generation of humans should be more capable than the previous one. That's the point of civilization, isn't it? To keep getting better? The concept was so fundamentally human that it was difficult to translate into the mindset of species that had achieved perfect stability. The idea that better was always possible, that perfection was just another challenge to overcome, was alien to beings who had spent millennia in unchanging societies. High Counselor Velthara finally spoke. Dr. Watson, are you aware that your species is the first in recorded galactic history to achieve faster-than-light communication without guidance from an established civilization? Claire blinked in surprise. No, we weren't aware of that. How do other species usually achieve it? They are taught by more advanced civilizations when they are deemed ready for contact. But that would limit their development to existing knowledge, Ryan protested. How would new discoveries be made? This question struck at the heart of the galactic dilemma. New discoveries were rarely made because each